Bem-vindos a essa versão muito especial e com um convidado super especial, que é o Milcho Leviev. E primeiramente perguntar como é que é essa história de vir da Bulgária e se tornar um jazzista nos Estados Unidos. First thing, we'd like to know how it happened that you coming from Bulgaria, studying classical music. How did you get involved with jazz and finally move to New York, to the United States?
Los Angeles, actually. I was born in 1937, so when the World War II ended in 1944, and Bulgaria was occupied by the Russians, and the so-called communist regime took over, jazz was almost outlawed, the same way they outlawed it during Hitler's regime in Germany. But I was listening to jazz even from my early days. Before I started classical music, I was listening to things like In the Mood, Glenn Miller. And later, when I started listening to Voice of America, the broadcast, a friend of mine that was a little bit more advanced said, "Do you know what are you playing?" I said, "Boogie Woogie." No, he said, "This is the blues, this is the blues." I said, "I thought the blues is a slow dance." No. Blues is a special form of jazz. So he was my teacher later in my teens. And we all were listening to Willis Conver's program, Voice of America, which unfortunately was very often jammed
by
with
the government
machines. So whoever got it clean, that was our school by ear. And
do you have any relation with Bulgarian music itself, or?
Oh yeah, of course, yes. Of course. You can't help this music to be in your blood because it's the music you grow up with, the national folk, music, parallel with my classical things and my jazz. Maybe I'll play a little medley.
Sure, why not?
Of two songs. One is a folk song that I reharmonized a little bit. It's called Oh My Grandpa, which is like a ballad. And the other one is a thing that I played last night at a concert. It's another folk kind of rhythm, which is very complicated rhythm. The Bulgarian rhythms are very fast, which I renamed Bulgarian Boogie.
Vulgarian Boogie,
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
This last Bulgarian song it has echoes of some Arabic scales. And
Yeah,
because
you
of
know,
Danube, is that
I think the all Balkan music was influenced very highly by the gypsies, who, as we know, came from India.
India, right?
So they're nomads, and they carried their heritage. And Bulgarian music is influenced not only by the gypsies, by the Turks, the Turkish music. You know, the folks, they don't recognize the state borders. The music goes over the borders.
Okay. And talking about going over the borders, how did you end up going to the United States?
Well, that's a long story. I'll try to make it short. During the 60s, when Nikita Khrushchev was on power, there was so-called thawing period when it became a little bit freer. And at that time, I didn't have any intentions to leave the country. But the end of the 60s, when the events in Czechoslovakia took place and the Soviet tanks came, so I decided to defect to West Germany. And from West Germany, I applied to immigrate as a political refugee to the United States.
You came to Brazil to play Rhapsody in Blue with the Orquestra Já Sinfônica,
Right.
which I directed for 10 years.
Right, I understand.
And they say you have a very unique way of playing Rhapsody in Blue. Can you just give us an idea of how it is?
I love this piece since I was a teenager. I was actually only 13 years old when in Bulgaria, a friend of mine had the music, the written music of Rhapsody in Blue. Somehow he got it, and he gave it to me just for 2 days. He said, you can't have it more than 2 days. So I copied it. I
By
copied
hand.
it for 2 days, and since then I remember it. First I played it as is, the way it was, about 13, 14 minutes piece, which I played as a solo piano. Then when I started to concertize, I played it with symphony orchestra, you know, as a solo pianist with orchestra. But later in the 80s, when I was in the States, I thought that this is very improvisational piece by character. As a matter of fact, the story goes that when Gershwin wrote it very quickly for a couple of weeks, he didn't have time to orchestrate, so Freddie Grofe orchestrated it, and he didn't have time to indicate the cadences, the solo piano parts, so his parts were blank on the paper. One violinist looked over the score, and where there was a piano part, there was nothing. It said only to Whiteman, Paul Whiteman, look at me for a cue. So that gave me the idea that I could stretch some parts of the Rhapsody, open them, as we say in jazz language, use the harmonies, the changes, as we say, and improvise. For example, I mean, this a beautiful thing that usually it's played in the middle, I played very slow, like. It has such a beautiful harmony that it could blow.
So that's the story of Rhapsody.
Yeah, so there are many ways I played it.
Yes, I find it the best Gershwin composition ever, yes.
I agree with you.
Yes.
Also, Porgy and Bess, the opera.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great composition. Yeah.
Okay, and talking about your record of Brazilian music, are you very close to Brazil, I imagine?
Oh, yeah.
Brazilian music.
This is my first time being in this country, but the Brazilian culture, musical heritage, I know since early days. I was listening to Villa-Lobos, the classical composer, and of course when the 60s, the Bossa Nova came, I was at that time conductor of the big band in the Radio Sofia. So I have an interesting story to tell about that. It was still under the communism, of course, and I arranged some bossa novas. So once the secretary of the Communist Party of the whole radio summoned me in his cabinet and said, Comrade Leviev. Comrade, the address was Comrade. Sure. Put an end to the bossa novas. I said, why? He said, do you know who brought the bossa nova in the United States from Brazil? I said, some Charlie Bird, Stan Getz, Good, so you know that. But who sent Stan Getz to Brazil? I said, I suppose his manager. That's what you don't know. I said, who sent him? He said, CIA.
Oh.
I said, no, it's not a joke. I said, why? In order to boycott, he said, in order to boycott Brothers Cuba Cha-Cha-Cha. So that was the life we had there.
Wow, that's heavy.
Very heavy. So you're asking why I had to leave. I mean,
let's play some bossa nova.
Okay.
All right.
Which one?
Whichever you want.
Wave, would you mind? I love this.
Yes.
Jobim still.
Great.
Okay.
O que a gente está fazendo aqui, tocando juntos, é a grande vantagem do jazz, que é a improvisação. Né? A gente combina a música na hora, sai tocando, um vai atrás do outro, e a música se constrói à medida que vai sendo tocada. Então, eu vou pedir para o Milcho dizer qual é a visão dele de improvisação. Milcho, all we've been doing is improvising, right?
Right.
We just met.
Right. We never played before.
How do you explain improvisation to people? Like, you're a teacher too, so when you're talking about improvisation, how we explain it?
I think that improvisation is a very important activity in everyday's life of everybody. If we schedule, it's good to plan things, it's good to make a structure of things, but we are forced to improvise sometimes because unexpected circumstances and things happen every day. In music, I think it's the same thing. As a matter of fact, improvisation in music is nothing new. The folk people, they improvise all the time, different folk, musics in the world. Even in the classical music, all these people, Johann Sebastian Bach and Chopin, they were improvisers before anything else.
They say that composition is selected improvisation, right?
Actually,
you improvise and write.
Yeah, Stravinsky said the composition is a frozen improvisation.
Frozen improvisation.
So, of course, there are two different kinds of improvisation. Mostly in jazz, we improvise on so-called harmony or in the melody, but improvisation could be sometimes completely free and based on nothing previously thought, just free. But as we know, art is sort of a form, so we try to create a form during the playing. So it's instant composing. That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Talking about improvisation, we just talked that you have a record about Beatles music.
Right.
How do you improvise on a very well-known Beatles melody, for instance? Could you play something?
I'll play the title song of the album, When I'm 64,
Great.
which is very appropriate for myself because I'm 64.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we can say that jazz brought improvisation back
Exactly.
to Occidental music, right?
Yeah.
And and how you feel that how jazz is going nowadays, but jazz specifically, how you think it's going now? Some say that jazz is dying.
Well, you know, the saying jazz is coming back, and some people say jazz never left. And, you know, it's very difficult for me to draw a clear border between jazz and other because jazz is the music of the previous century, the 20th century, and it influenced directly or indirectly any kind of music. Even rock and roll came from R&B, which is rhythm and blues, and the blues is the basic trunk of the tree that everything started. And when we talk about fusion or world music or new age or new wave, there is always elements of jazz there. Sometimes there are more, sometimes there are less. I don't know what they mean sometimes by pure jazz. Jazz was never pure. From the beginning it was dirty. From the beginning it was a mixture of several cultures, African and American, which American doesn't mean
European.
American, was like Spanish, French. In New Orleans it was a melting pot. So it's the world music. The world music was jazz from the beginning, from the very, very beginning, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And well, jazz is based on standards, right? Basically, the traditional. Maybe you should play a standard.
Let's play a standard.
Yeah. É uma oportunidade muito rara para um pianista tocar com outro pianista, né? Nunca se acha um piano, quanto mais dois. Então está uma diversão tremenda aqui. E o Milcho, além de tocar piano maravilhosamente, como vocês estão vendo, ele tem outras atividades. Milcho, besides playing the piano, what else you do in music?
I write, compose, arrange, teach. I teach part-time at USC, University of Southern California, in the Jazz Studies department.
And you conduct also?
Also, I conduct.
What's easier for you?
That's a good question. I think not easier, but more to my heart is to compose, because you are alone home and you could do it at whatever pace and time you want to do it, as opposed to performing, which is pretty hard, because despite of what mood you're in, or some close relative might die, and you have a very important concert and you can't cancel it, and so it takes much more, I think. Performing, it's harder.
Okay. Well, we're talking about jazz and how so many styles go under the umbrella name jazz. Nowadays, a lot of people are trying to get back to the real roots and be like some real jazz, and this is not jazz, this is jazz, this is not. How do you feel about this tendency in the States right now?
That's a very good question, because there has been a lot of controversy, as you know recently, about. I personally don't have anything against staying to the roots, the blues and things like this, but at the same time, jazz has been always a fresh art form. What I'm afraid in certain recent tendencies is to make the jazz academic. I think a lot of things that killed part of the classical heritage, classical music, was exactly this academic approach and rules, and that's how you play Bach, not this way, but that's how it was played, you know. So I hear similar things. That's how jazz should be played, like, you know, like Art Tatum or Fats Wallace or Charlie Parker. We have to remember that when Charlie Parker played this music, the bebop, was a sort of a revolution. a lot of people, even some of their colleagues, didn't like it, because there is a good expression. It's not mine. Slonimsky, a critic, musical, invented it. It's the fear of the unfamiliar. And I think jazz, in its very short history, is demonstrating its best when there is something uninhibited and new and fresh. So this tendency to put the jazz into a harness, and that's how it should be played, and this is jazz and all the other is not jazz, to put the borderlines, I think it's a very dangerous and for this kind of music. I don't care how you call it, jazz or whatever. The name is not that important, but the creative element and the daring element of it is the most important, I think.
Freedom.
Freedom, exactly. Right.
What about free jazz? How do you feel that you just start playing and see what happens?
Let's do something right now. Eventually we'll go to something, but let me start and you'll hear it and you'll do what it is. Okay.
E para terminar, eu gostaria de pedir para o Milcho Leviev tocar uma das suas grandes composições. Com vocês, Milcho Leviev, muito obrigado.